a network of private collectors and offshore accounts where the proceeds from these secret sales were allegedly funneled. The court case, which captivated the nation, painted a drastically different picture of Rick Harrison than the one audiences had come to know and love through porn stars. Prosecutors described a man driven by greed, willing to blur ethical and legal lines to increase profits and safeguard his empire. They argued that behind Rick's sharp business acumen and folksy television charm was a calculated operation meant to evade taxes, deceive the public, and exploit the very historical legacy he once claimed to honor. Testimonies from key witnesses, including former employees, forensic accountants, and cultural artifact experts, were devastating. One particularly damaging revelation involved a series of emails between Rick and a European intermediary discussing the illicit acquisition of artifacts from war-torn regions, including manuscripts, relics, and antiquities believed to be looted from national museums. These items, according to the prosecution, were smuggled into the U.S. under falsified manifests and then sold through a shadow inventory, never recorded in official books, and often sold to wealthy private collectors for millions. In his defense, Rick maintained that he had no knowledge of any illegal activity, insisting that he relied on staff and third-party appraisers to verify the legitimacy of all transactions. His legal team argued that he was being scapegoated by disgruntled former employees and overzealous prosecutors eager to make an example out of a public figure. But despite these defenses, the evidence was overwhelming. Surveillance footage, secret recordings, and wiretapped conversations showed Rick negotiating the prices of certain questionable items, using coded language to obscure their origins. In one intercepted call, he allegedly described a stolen Civil War-era journal as a piece of lost American soul that don't need paperwork to prove its worth. Public reaction to the trial was a mix of disbelief and outrage. Social media erupted with theories, debates, and speculation, with longtime fans defending Rick's character, while others expressed disappointment that someone seen as a symbol of hard-earned success could be involved in such a scandal. Meanwhile, the History Channel permanently suspended Pawn Stars, removing episodes from streaming platforms and scrubbing promotional material involving Rick from its official website. Tourists visiting the gold and silver pawn shop found it surrounded by barricades and federal notices, the once bustling establishment now reduced to a shell of its former self. The final verdict came in late 2024 after a lengthy deliberation. The jury found Rick Harrison guilty on multiple counts of tax evasion, conspiracy to traffic stolen artifacts, money laundering, and obstruction of justice. The judge, citing the scope and severity of the crimes as well as the abuse of his public platform, sentenced Rick to life in federal prison without the possibility of parole. The courtroom, packed with media, fans, and former employees, fell into stunned silence. Rick, in a final statement before sentencing, maintained his innocence, stating, "I've made mistakes, but I never set out to hurt anyone. This isn't justice. It's politics and betrayal." The news sent shockwaves through the entertainment industry and beyond. Discussions emerged around celebrity accountability, the ethical responsibilities of those who deal in cultural heritage, and the broader implications of how fame can be used to mask illegal enterprise. Former co-stars Corey Harrison and Chumley Russell released brief statements expressing sadness and disbelief while distancing themselves from Rick's legal troubles. Corey, who had once been groomed to inherit the business, reportedly left Las Vegas altogether to start a new life in Arizona, while Chumley returned to private life, avoiding further media appearances. Rick's incarceration marked one of the most dramatic downfalls in the history of reality television. A man who once symbolized entrepreneurial spirit and encyclopedic knowledge had fallen from grace. Now known not for his negotiations on screen, but for a criminal empire built behind the scenes, his legacy became a cautionary tale, one of ambition turned to excess and of fame that couldn't shield a man from the weight of justice. Even as Rick serves his sentence, rumors swirl of appeals and tell-all books in the works. Some speculate that Rick is compiling a memoir from behind bars, promising to reveal the truth of what really happened, who turned against him, and how deep the corruption went. Claims that, if true, could spark an entirely new chapter in an already unbelievable saga. Until then, the world can only watch and wonder how a beloved TV personality went from closing deals in a Vegas pawn shop to closing a cell door behind him forever. A network of shell companies across multiple states and even offshore accounts helped obscure the financial trail of high-ticket sales. These revelations painted a damning picture of a once revered television personality turned alleged criminal. Mastermind. Despite his legal team's best efforts to discredit the evidence and question the credibility of witnesses, public opinion began to shift. Longtime fans of Pawn Stars, who once viewed Rick Harrison as the epitome of American entrepreneurship, were now confronted with the possibility that the very foundation of his empire had been built on deception. The courtroom proceedings were intense and often dramatic. Prosecutors argued that Rick had not only committed white-collar crimes, but had done so with meticulous planning over several years, evading millions in taxes and profiting from the black market trade of cultural heritage. Artifacts. They accused him of exploiting legal gray areas in the pawn industry to mask illicit activities, using his fame and reputation as a shield. Meanwhile, the defense painted Rick as a victim of circumstance and betrayal, emphasizing his charitable contributions, long-standing role in the Las Vegas community, and lack of a prior criminal record. As the trial drew to a close, the atmosphere in the courtroom grew tense. Supporters of Rick filled the gallery alongside reporters eager to capture every twist of the sensational case. The final days were marked by the testimony of a former confidant, a woman who had worked closely with Rick for over a decade and claimed to have helped orchestrate the off-the-books transactions. Her testimony was the nail in the coffin. Tearfully, she recounted how Rick had persuaded her to forge documents, misrepresent item values, and funnel money through shell entities. She described the fear and loyalty that kept her silent for years, and how guilt eventually compelled her to come forward. In cross-examination, the defense tried to discredit her by highlighting inconsistencies in her timeline and suggesting she had been coerced by investigators, but the damage was done. Combined with mounting financial records and expert witness testimony about illegal artifact sales, the jury was left with little doubt. After weeks of deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict: guilty on multiple counts of tax evasion, money laundering, conspiracy to traffic stolen artifacts, and possession of stolen cultural property. The sentencing phase that followed was another media spectacle. The prosecution pushed for the maximum, arguing that Rick had not only broken the law but betrayed public trust on a national level. They emphasized the extent of the deception, the international scope of the trafficking operation, and the significant financial damage caused. The defense pleaded for leniency, highlighting Rick's previously clean record, the collapse of his family life under legal stress, and his contributions to educational programming through Pawn Stars. Rick himself addressed the court, maintaining his innocence but expressing regret for any mistakes made in judgment during his business operations. His voice cracked as he spoke about his late father, the old man, and how he had hoped to honor his legacy through the pawn shop. But the judge, unmoved by the emotional appeal, issued a scathing rebuke. He called the crimes an egregious abuse of fame and power and sentenced Rick Harrison to life in federal prison without the possibility of parole under the RICO, Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. The courtroom gasped. Outside media outlets erupted. Fans stood in disbelief. It was a stunning fall from grace for one of reality television's most beloved figures. Within hours, social media platforms were flooded with posts, theories, and debates. Some fans refused to believe it, insisting on conspiracy theories or suggesting Rick had been framed by jealous competitors or even the federal government. Others expressed betrayal, shocked that the man they had watched for years was capable of such calculated deceit. The impact was immediate and far-reaching. The History Channel officially canceled Pawn Stars, removing all future episodes from the broadcast schedule and suspending syndication deals. Merchandise bearing Rick's likeness disappeared from shelves. The gold and silver pawn shop, once a buzzing tourist destination, saw its foot traffic dwindle to a trickle. Within months, it filed for bankruptcy. Corey Harrison attempted to keep the business afloat, but eventually closed the doors permanently, citing irreparable damage to the brand. Chumley, who had faced his own legal troubles prior, publicly expressed his sadness over Rick's sentencing, but declined further comment. Other reality stars who had appeared on crossover episodes kept their distance, unwilling to be associated with the scandal. The fallout extended beyond the entertainment industry. Cultural institutions that had worked with Rick on appraisals or donations began reviewing their inventories for questionable items. One museum in Texas discovered that a Civil War-era sword donated by Rick had in fact been listed on an international stolen artifacts database. It was returned to its rightful owner in France, prompting further investigations into Rick's past dealings. International watchdog groups praised U.S. authorities for cracking down on illicit artifact trafficking and used Rick's case as a cautionary tale for other high-profile collectors. Meanwhile, government agencies strengthened regulations around pawnshops, antique dealerships, and private collections of cultural property. In prison, Rick Harrison reportedly kept to himself. Sources from within the federal penitentiary in Florence, Colorado, nicknamed the Alcatraz of the Rockies, claimed he rarely socialized and often requested history books from the library. Retreating into the same quiet study that had defined his childhood, letters from fans poured in, some expressing support, others disappointment. Rick was said to read them all. According to one former inmate, Rick began working in the prison library and started drafting a memoir tentatively titled The Rise and Fall of Rick Harrison. Whether it will ever be published remains unknown, but the rumor alone sparked interest from publishers and media outlets eager to capitalize on the sensational story. Rick's family continued to live with the stigma. His son Corey gave a rare interview months after the sentencing, expressing his heartbreak and disbelief. "This wasn't the dad I knew," he said. "He taught me to work hard, be honest, and do right by people. I don't understand how we ended up here." Corey also revealed that the family had cut ties with some former employees who were involved in the whistleblowing and testified against Rick. "They betrayed us," he said, though he admitted that if Rick had done what the court believed, then perhaps they had no choice. Deanna, Rick's third wife, filed for divorce shortly after the trial and has since moved out of state, avoiding the spotlight. Former customers who had once proudly displayed their appearances on the show began removing memorabilia from their homes. YouTube channels that had built content around Pawn Stars either pivoted or shut down entirely. The show's fan community fractured, with online forums turning into battlegrounds of speculation, defense, and vitriol. Despite everything, a small contingent of diehard fans continues to believe in Rick's innocence. Some launched petitions demanding a retrial, while others created online campaigns to free Rick Harrison, suggesting he had been the victim of federal overreach or a targeted campaign against wealthy public figures. But legal experts argue that the evidence against him was overwhelming and the conviction unlikely to be overturned. Appeals were filed but quickly dismissed, citing the thoroughness of the original proceedings and the weight of the evidence. Still, the question remains. How did a man who appeared to live by honesty, integrity, and a love for history fall so far? Was it greed, pressure, hubris, or a slow erosion of values in the face of fame and fortune? Rick Harrison's story now serves as both a cautionary tale and a complex study in human ambition. A man who once educated millions on history is now etched into it, not as a scholar or businessman, but as a disgraced icon whose empire crumbled under the weight of his own actions. And yet, even now, some former fans rewatch old Pawn Stars episodes, revisiting a time when Rick was a symbol of American grit and street-smart business savvy. They look past the headlines and remember the man who turned a small pawn shop into a global sensation. The Rick Harrison they see on screen is different from the man in the courtroom, and perhaps that's what makes the fall so tragic. Because once upon a time, Rick Harrison wasn't just a pawn shop owner. He was a part of our living rooms, a teacher in disguise, a businessman with heart. And now he's just a cautionary chapter in the annals of television history. The media. Coverage didn't die down with the sentencing. Instead, it evolved. Major networks produced multi-part docuseries dissecting every chapter of Rick Harrison's rise and fall. Streaming platforms competed to secure exclusive rights to dramatize his life story. Within a year, 2 major studios began development on biopics, casting well-known actors to portray Rick and the rest of the Pawn Stars crew, with some productions leaning into the criminal aspects and others taking a more sympathetic tone. Former employees, family friends, and business associates came forward with stories, some corroborating the trial's narrative, others defending Rick's character and insisting the truth had been distorted. The national discourse became not just about Rick himself, but about fame, capitalism, and the fine line between business savvy and moral compromise. Ironically, Rick's incarceration only fueled a cult of personality around him. Bootleg t-shirts with Free Rick slogans popped up in Vegas tourist shops, while his old catchphrases became ironic memes on social media. Fans debated whether his actions, while illegal, were truly immoral, or simply the inevitable result of the celebrity industrial complex that rewarded profit above all else. College courses began referencing the case in classes on media ethics, law, and pop culture. Meanwhile, the Smithsonian announced an exhibit on the intersection of television, crime, and Americana that included references to Rick's pawnshop empire. The pawn industry as a whole experienced a reckoning. Lawmakers used Rick's case to push through tighter regulations and oversight, especially for establishments dealing in historical or high-value items. Several states mandated digital tracking for all pawned goods, and the international cooperation on antiquities trafficking saw a notable boost. Rick's own family continued to fracture under the public pressure. Corey disappeared from the limelight, reportedly spending time in therapy and moving into private consulting work far from Las Vegas. He declined multiple offers to write a tell-all, stating in one rare podcast appearance that some stories are too painful to monetize. Chumlee, ever the unpredictable figure, attempted a brief comeback with a YouTube channel focused on vintage collectibles, but the comment sections were flooded with references to Rick's conviction, forcing him to disable public feedback entirely. Despite this, some segments of the audience remained loyal, engaging with Chumlee's new persona and defending his innocence by association. Behind bars, Rick's days were marked by routine and reflection. Those close to him claim he's mellowed, resigned to his new life, but still intellectually engaged. He reportedly spends hours writing, reading about world history, and occasionally giving informal lectures to fellow inmates about ancient coins and military memorabilia. His unpublished memoir, parts of which allegedly leaked online, paints a picture of a man who feels both misunderstood and remorseful, not necessarily for what he did, but for the unintended consequences and pain caused to his family. In these pages, Rick insists the lines between legal and illegal became increasingly blurry as his fame grew, and he suggests that he trusted the wrong people, was too proud to ask for help, and failed to recognize the growing rot within his own empire. There were rumors, too, always rumors, that the FBI had used